Across Colorado, workers are being denied their paychecks even though they earned it. It's called wage theft, and victims of it come from a multitude of backgrounds. On this episode of Real Talk with Micah Smith, we're hearing from victims, a Denver city official, and a nonprofit working to help workers get the money they're owed. Welcome to Real Talk with Micah Smith. I'm your host, Micah, and I am so glad to have you with us. There are so many workers in Colorado who are showing up to work every day, completing the task at hand, but are never paid for their work. This is called wage theft, and it happens to hundreds of thousands of Coloradans every year. A Colorado Fiscal Institute report found there's about $728 million worth of wage theft happening in Colorado every year. About 440,000 low-wage workers are victims of it, and Colorado loses more than $45 million a year in tax revenue because of wage theft. In February of last year, 2 Denver strip clubs were ordered to pay $14 million in restitution and fines for wage theft. Denver's Division of Labor claims both Diamond Cabaret and Rick's Cabaret were found to have engaged in questionable workplace practices. An audit uncovered the businesses required performers to pay a house fee of up to $93 per shift just to work. At Rick's Cabaret, the investigation says workers were also required to put their tips into what they called the rusty envelope, named after the regional manager. Back then, entertainer Devin Dewey, who worked at both clubs, told us she wanted to share her story for reasons beyond her paycheck.
I'm a neuroscience and philosophy major. I'm a full-time student. At the end of the day, I really had to make ends meet. You kind of have this inherent trust, I think, with your employer too, that they're not going to steal. For a long time, it felt like, who could we tell? And who was going to help? And so, if you do speak up, they're able to retaliate and give a lot of backlash in sort of unprecedented ways that are not the norm for a lot of workplaces. We have been historically ignored and looked over. And so they're able to get away with a lot of this. I hope that the conversation shifts from this frayed argument of immorality of strippers to what's immoral about corporations exploiting workers.
The Denver Division of Labor has ordered RCI Hospitality, the owner of both of the clubs, to pay $11.3 million in restitution to more than 230 affected workers. The company is also ordered to pay $2.6 million in fines to the city and county of Denver. An attorney for both clubs responded to the allegations saying, quote, Diamond Cabaret and Rick's Cabaret have fully complied with the law. These demands are not about justice, they are about control. But last May, Denver licensing officials threatened to revoke Diamond Cabaret's operating permit for non-compliance with city orders. This was the first time Denver had taken this kind of disciplinary action due to wage theft investigations. Wage theft is also extremely prevalent in the construction industry, costing workers more than $50 billion annually nationwide. Jose Salazar knows that cost personally. A sheet metal worker, he says a former employer cheated him out of $22,000 in 2024. Last year, he told Denver 7 things got worse when he questioned the employer about his unpaid wages.
So I was working at a prevailing wage job, and they pretty much didn't pay us. They were paying us regular wage the entire time. And I didn't know about it until I see the guys from the Denver Post, actually. They come over to the side and they start asking workers about it. And they asked me on my lunchtime about if I was getting paid prevailing wage, which I said no. And I shared my experience with them. When they bring the note out, they contact the company, and they saw the news too, so they called me to the office and they made a private meeting with me about it, and which they didn't answer the questions either about when we were going to get paid. All they said it was, if I want to go by the law, they can play by the law too, and they have their lawyers ready to go for it. And then they retaliate against me after that, sending me to another state. So they brought the vice president from out of state, and he tried to explain us that not every employee is entitled to prevailing wage. just the ones putting hands on metal, and that's all they did. It affected everything because they retaliate against me. They fired me. They didn't pay me the entire amount. So I've been since November without a job.
Jose says he did file a claim and was able to get some of the money back, but not the full amount he was owed. Last year, he decided to speak up to try to keep this from happening to other people. He testified in front of lawmakers in support of a bill aimed at helping victims and punishing employers who don't pay their workers.
They always go, like they say, they try to go by the law pretty much. So like I was reading on the bill, so they can go without paying a certain amount. And after that, they don't have to pay anything more than that. So that's why we think the bill should go higher, so that way it could help all the workers, and it will prevent the employers to start doing the wage theft.
That bill was actually signed into law last year to try to provide a solution for people like Jose. Right now, wage theft victims can only get back up to $7,500 of what they're owed. Starting July 1st of this year, that cap will go up to $13,000 and would increase with inflation starting in 2028. Wow, there are just so many people that have been victims to this, and that is why we are doing a full episode on it. And now that we've heard from workers who say they were cheated out of their checks, we'll turn to the officials charged with holding employers accountable. Coming up, I talked to the auditor's office in Denver about how the city is cracking down on wage theft. This is Real Talk with Micah Smith. Welcome back to Real Talk with Micah Smith. Before the break, we heard from Devin Dewey, a victim of wage theft who worked for Diamond Cabaret and Rick's Cabaret. And in a few moments, we will hear from Matthew Fritzmauer, Executive Director of the Denver Labor Division of the Denver Auditor's Office, who is at the forefront of a lot of these investigations. In November, the City and County of Denver's Auditor's Office announced it recovered a record $2.31 million in restitution and helped 7,200 workers get unpaid wages in the 2025 reporting year that ended October 31st. Denver Labor, a city division that enforces wage and hour laws within the City and County of Denver, stated that this marks a 60% increase in the number of workers it assisted compared to the previous year. I went to Fritzmauer's office to talk about the work his department is doing. So Matt, my first question for you is, how prevalent is wage theft in the Denver metro?
It is one of the most prevalent crimes in the Denver metro area. So last year, the auditor actually commissioned research from experts at Rutgers to analyze data for the last 15 years or so, and they found conclusively that minimum wage violations affect every year tens of thousands of workers in the Denver metro area and result in tens of millions of dollars and actually more than $100 million in losses every year.
Oh my goodness. We heard from Devin earlier this episode, just talking about her experiences as an exotic dancer, but who would you say is most susceptible to wage thefts? Is there a certain population, a certain type of line of work that's more susceptible?
Yes to both. It's such a great question. So part of what we used this research for was to identify high-risk industries. So bars and restaurants, huge risk for wage theft. Domestic work, home health care, hosts and hostesses, childcare, like these are all high-risk industries, construction as well. And what you might realize is that the kinds of people who tend to work in those industries, the kinds of people who are more likely to have their wages stolen, they tend to be people of color, they're more likely to be immigrants, they're more likely to have less formal education, to be younger, to be female. And so, yeah, there are all these identifiable populations that are at risk.
Yeah. I know, your office clearly does these investigations and it's very helpful, but do you find it challenging to get victims to come forward?
Definitely.
And why is that?
There's some very understandable reasons why people don't come forward. The biggest one, though, is that people are afraid if they stick their neck out, they'll suffer retaliation. And considering how many people live paycheck to paycheck and don't have a lot in savings, a lot of disposable income, getting fired can be devastating for someone's life, right? Getting your hours cut can be devastating. Even if you find another job a week later, you start having to make some really hard choices, right? Am I going to pay for rent? Or food, am I going to prioritize going to the doctor or fixing my car? Things like that. Beyond that, people oftentimes, they don't know where to go. There's kind of an alphabet soup of agencies in the area, and they don't always know about us. And then unfortunately, a lot of people just don't think it'll do any good, either because they're skeptical that the government will help them, or they don't think that they've got the power to assert their rights.
Wow. And even those who are brave enough to come forward, if you get retaliated against, if you get fired, even though there are legal steps you can take, that takes time, right? Yep. And if you're right, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, that's very hard.
Absolutely.
How does the auditor's office, how are you able to hold perpetrators accountable?
Credit to City Council and to the advocates who passed Denver's wage laws, but there are some extraordinary tools in there that are also very common sense and really provide us with the ability to enforce people's rights and to try to do it quickly. So we can always recover unpaid wages. Then City Council, the bill they passed requires us to apply interest on top of that. We often can apply damages on top of that as a multiplier of unpaid wages. Up to 3 times unpaid wages as damages. So $100 can become $400. And then beyond that, there are fines that we can impose for particularly bad behavior that are payable to the city and county of Denver.
Wow.
So what Denver's done is set up this system of enforcement that creates real deterrence so that it makes it a lot riskier to choose to violate someone's basic wage rights.
And as you mentioned just a few moments ago, you are able to recover some of this. Maybe it's tough to recover all, but you are seeing results.
Absolutely. Every single year for the last, maybe 5 years, we've recovered more and more money every year and enforced the rights of more and more people than ever before. So just to give a little bit of context, in 2022, we recovered, I think, around $1.1 million for workers. Last year it was $2.3 million. And we also enforced the rights of 7,200 workers last year. And in 2022, I think it was around 2,200.
Wow. Matt, I do want to go big picture. Obviously, wage theft is devastating for the employee who is having their wages stolen, oftentimes by an employer that they trust. But there are other implications here, sometimes with tax revenue that impacts really the entire city. Can you talk about just the larger implications even?
Wage theft is a social problem. That's the best way to understand it. When someone has their wages stolen, it affects the people around them, not just their family members, the people who depend on them, but also their communities, their neighborhoods, right? You are hurt if your neighbor is evicted because they cannot pay rent, because they aren't paid minimum wage. That creates enormous destabilization. You mentioned tax implications. If people aren't being paid properly, if they're misclassified as independent contractors, their employers aren't paying their fair share of taxes. And this, takes money from already starved social safety programs that we really care about: Social Security, Medicare, unemployment insurance. And then beyond that, I would say that because we know that there are certain kinds of people and communities that are high risk for wage theft, that disproportionately experience it, it's also a problem that broadly affects women more than men, people of color more than white people, people with less education and immigrants rather than native-born people. The final thing I'll say is that we also have to think about employers in all of this. There are thousands and thousands of employers in Denver who do the right thing, who pay their workers, they pay overtime, provide sick leave, they pay their taxes. And they shouldn't have to deal with unfair competition that's supported by one of their competitors just deciding, I'm going to pay $4 less per hour than the restaurant down the street.
My final question for you, Matt, is what would you say to someone who knows that they are a victim of wage theft, but they're afraid to come forward?
Talk to us. You can file a complaint anonymously. We can take steps to protect your identity. We can take steps to do our best to make sure you won't be retaliated against. And we have a really good track record for getting people money.
I think that's key. The results are there.
Yes.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for joining us for this Real Talk.
Thank you, Micah.
Such important work happening. And hopefully in that interview, you heard some options that you might be able to take if you or someone you know is a victim of wage theft. Again, there are certain groups that are more vulnerable to wage theft. And coming up after the break, we'll hear from a nonprofit law firm working to protect and help those vulnerable populations from this crime. This is Real Talk with Micah Smith. Welcome back to Real Talk with Micah Smith. This episode, we've been discussing wage theft, and now I want to introduce you to a nonprofit law firm that represents workers in litigation in these cases. Towards Justice is working to advance economic justice in Colorado and across the state. This includes representing workers in class action lawsuits against employers for wage theft and in labor trafficking cases. So employment attorney for Towards Justice, Victoria Guzman, joins us now to talk more about wage theft. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Micah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start by talking more about Towards Justice, the work your organization does, and what you specifically do.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Towards Justice is a nonprofit legal organization, and a large part of our work is filing class action lawsuits on behalf of workers, but another part of the work includes advocacy, policy work. So we have a person who's down at the Capitol helping draft and amend bills that help workers in Colorado as well. And then our work also spans in protecting workers, not just workers, but everybody, because I mean, everyone's a worker. Yeah. And so we focus on antitrust, consumer debt collection, and TRAP agreements, which are training repayment agreement provisions, all aspects of relationships between workers and corporations that create an imbalance of power.
So you're responding to some of the issues that exist, and you're trying to be proactive in preventing some of what you see happening. In your work, who have you found is most susceptible to wage theft, and who is the biggest perpetrator?
Yeah, so anybody can be susceptible to wage theft. It's most often workers in the food and beverage or accommodation industries, as well as construction. But honestly, anybody with lack of access to power or resources can be a victim of wage theft. And we often see the perpetrators, these large corporations that have nationwide policies, or franchise owners across Colorado.
Wow, I imagine the big corporations also have big legal teams as well, so it can really be a fight when you're fighting these cases.
Yes, it can.
Mm-hmm. Are there any government actions you feel people can take to try to stop or even lessen wage theft?
Yeah, so I think that the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment does a great job. They have a free service through its Division of Labor Standards and Statistics where people can file claims for up to $7,500 for wages. Mm-hmm. And then Denver Labor also has a free service for workers in the city and county of Denver. But for those workers who are owed more than $7,500 or don't live and work in Denver and Colorado, there is a real need. And I think something that the government could do is more local prosecutors could go after employers for committing wage theft. There are criminal provisions within the Colorado Wage Claim Act with provisions for starting at petty theft up to Class 2 felonies. And I'm just not really seeing a lot of prosecutors going after employers for this type of theft. And I think if there was more of a focus, it would really create a deterrence for employers from stealing from their workers.
Yeah. I think about when I asked you the question about who's most susceptible, and you said everyone. I think included in that, of course, immigrants, maybe undocumented immigrants, especially when we talk about construction being
Yes.
a prevalent industry. Is that kind of a tricky area where you might have victims who are afraid to come forward because of their status?
It's very common that people are afraid to come forward. While it's illegal for their employer to retaliate against them or report them to ICE for asserting their right to wages, it still happens. And we can file a claim for retaliation, and the governor of Colorado has announced that it is illegal to do these sort of things to workers. It doesn't stop it from happening. And so it takes very brave people to come forward if their immigration status is at risk.
What should you do if you feel that you've been a victim of wage theft, but you're also afraid of that retaliation?
Yeah, Towards Justice operates an intake program where we help connect all Coloradans with legal resources. And so even though we focus on class actions, we still review every single intake that comes in and try to connect those people with the resources or with attorneys who might be able to better assess their claims on an individual basis. And so they can go to our website and fill out an intake, and we're happy to talk to them and help connect them with the right people or give them on advice for next steps.
So it might be good just to even explore your options, even if you may not ultimately move forward with a case. Yeah. Can you share any examples of cases with positive outcomes for those who did step forward and report this issue?
Yeah, so I'm relatively new at Towards Justice, so I can't speak to the cases I've worked on at Towards Justice, but I recently litigated a case against Amazon that went up to the Colorado Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court issued a unanimous decision that Colorado has a lot more protections than federal law, and a lot of employers default to providing the protections under federal law, but don't provide the protections that Colorado affords. And so that one person stepping forward resulted in a Colorado Supreme Court decision that expanded, or actually just clarified the law and said, no, Colorado workers are entitled to a lot more than the average person in the US.
Wow. What would you say, just in this line of work, can be the most challenging part of your job?
There's a lot of fear. Getting somebody to step up and speak not only just on behalf of themselves, but on behalf of all of their workers. The reality is that everybody needs to work and pay their rent and take care of their family, and people who step up as class representatives really put themselves on the line. It's illegal to retaliate, but employers do it all the time, and it really takes a strong, courageous person to come forward and take the steps necessary to fight for their own rights, but then also fight for the rights of their colleagues.
I think throughout the show, we've heard from people who've been personally touched by this, and a lot of their stories are tough to hear and are pretty tragic, but this has just broader implications, and you touched on it right there. Everybody is a worker, and so this is an issue we should all be paying attention to.
Yes. Yeah, and I see all kinds of workers who are in low income or low wage jobs who are frequent victims of wage theft. But then I've also seen people who have been working their entire lives and have been treated well, and then maybe a new manager comes in or they start a new job, and for the first time in their lives they're experiencing wage theft. And so it doesn't just happen to select few people, it can happen to anybody, and it can really affect people's livelihoods and their families.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to bring home, Victoria, that you can fight this. I know it's scary, but you can fight this. And in some cases, you can recover some of your wages.
Yes, that's true. And litigation is only one avenue. As I mentioned, the CDLE provides a free service for workers. Denver Labor does an amazing job helping Denver workers. And there are ways to fight it, and even just gaining knowledge can really help not only yourself, but your colleagues.
All right, Victoria, thank you so much for joining us for this Real Talk.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And that is this week's episode of Real Talk with Micah Smith. We are so thankful that every week you choose to tune in for this Real Talk on issues that impact Coloradans who are often overlooked. If there's a Real Talk you would like to have, please let me know. You can send me an email at micah.smith@denver7.com. In the meantime, you can find all of our shows on denver7.com/realtalk. Have a great day.